There's an Irish politician by the name of Richard Barrett. And, man, he went to townski, just going after Western hypocrisy and double standards in regards to Ukraine. So you'll see here exactly why this is so powerful. He, in no way, shape, or form, is doing whataboutism to deflect from the crimes of Vladimir Putin. He is just making an honest and objective point about the nature of the West and how committed we truly are to human rights and democracy and freedom and justice and all these high-minded values we pretend to have. Take a look.
All of us have rightly condemned the crimes against humanity that are being committed by Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. And the government has moved instantly, within 5 days, to sanction Putin's regime. And the strength of language that was used rightly against Putin as a barbarian, as a thug, as a murderer, as a warmonger, all of which are true. All of those things apply to the state of Israel in its treatment of the Palestinians, and yes, the government is concerned about its use of language and doesn't feel it is appropriate to even use the word apartheid when Amnesty International, the most respected human rights organization in the world, and Human Rights Watch, within a very short period of time, issue these damning reports saying that Israel, since its foundation, has been built on a system of oppression and domination and apartheid and racism, involving the murder of unarmed, innocent civilians on a regular basis, Gaza in a permanent state of humanitarian crisis. And yet you want to be careful about your language. You're happy to correctly use the most strong and robust language to describe the crimes against humanity of Vladimir Putin, but you will not use the same strength of language when it comes to describing Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, when it is now being documented and detailed by two of the most respected human rights organizations in the world. You don't want to even use the word apartheid. 5 days sanctions against Putin and his thugs, 70 years of oppression by the Palestinians, and it wouldn't be, what was the word you used? It wouldn't be helpful to impose sanctions. Exactly the same types of sanctions you've just initiated against Vladimir Putin. Will you support it? And I think the answer is clearly you're not going to.
Goddamn, son. That was powerful. That was a powerful speech. So, I mean, you guys know all these points. Again, he made clear in that speech, which is why I love it so much, he not at all is like excusing what Putin is doing or trying to downplay it or obscure or deflect. Because unfortunately, some people do make this point to act like, therefore, what Putin is doing is really not all that bad. That's the implication. And that's, no, that's not the point. The point isn't, when we do it, it's really bad. When Israel does it, it's really bad. When our allies do it, it's really bad. So we got to overlook when Putin does it. No, the point should be, as he's rightly pointing out, it's terrible when everybody's doing it. It is an illegal and offensive invasion. It's aggressive. It is imperialistic. It's not all about NATO. Maybe parts of it are about NATO. But if you think that's the whole picture, you're out of your mind. There's also a tremendous amount of natural gas in Ukraine that Putin wants to get his hands on. Absolutely. There's also his own speech where he gave a blood and soil portion of the speech, which was like, hey, I kind of feel like Ukraine is fake and it's really mine. It's really ours. So learn to live with that because we're going to take it. Okay? Can't overlook that part of the speech. A lot of people are overlooking that part of the speech. But the point he's making is both are bad. You only care about one of them. And that's true. That's true. So in the case of Israel, I mean, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, giant human rights organizations have looked into it, and they say in no uncertain terms, this is apartheid. This is settler colonialism. There is, rampant discrimination going on there on a regular basis. They're illegally occupying Palestinian territory. I mean, they commit war crimes on a Tuesday before brunch. That's what they do. But we don't care about that. And we won't even use the language. Never mind, sanctioning specific things. They don't do that. They won't even use the language. Western governments won't even use the language. Or at least, certainly the U.S. won't even use the language. So there's massive hypocrisy there. Yemen. We are aiding and abetting a genocide happening in Yemen. So many people dying in Saudi airstrikes, civilians, people starving on the ground because of a blockade. That stuff matters. Those are victims. But they're victims of us and our allies, so we overlook it and act like it doesn't count for whatever reason. It definitely counts. In Afghanistan, the Biden sanctions, even though they've released some of the money, they're still withholding billions of dollars that is rightfully Afghanistan's money from Afghanistan. So millions of people are starving. They're starving. They're starving because of our sanctions, because of Biden's sanctions. So anything to say about that? Is that criminal? Is that negligent? Is that a war crime? Yes, it is, but nobody says anything about it. In fact, they overlook it. Trump used to brag and admit that we're occupying part of Syria to jack their oil. Well, that's one of the main reasons, one of the main things we're going after Putin for, rightfully, because he's trying to get his hands on that natural gas. That's why he took Crimea in 2014. A lot of natural gas was found just off the coast of Crimea, then boom, he takes Crimea. Gee, I wonder why. So if that's a crime, and it is, well, so is occupying Syria and jacking their natural gas. Jacking their oil. So, look, the hypocrisy is deep, and it is immense. And you don't have moral standing if you don't also condemn it and want to do something to stop it when it's us. Let me give a great example. The U.S. ambassador to the UN gave a speech the other day, and one of the things she did was go after Russia for using cluster bombs against the civilian population in Ukraine. In the transcript of her commentary afterwards, they took out the part where she goes after Russia for using illegal cluster bombs. They're illegal under international law, but they took out the part. Why did they take out the part? Because the U.S. uses cluster bombs all the time. And that's, again, also illegal under international law. So you'd have a lot more moral standing if we didn't use the cluster bombs, wouldn't you? If we didn't use depleted uranium tips in Fallujah. There's a bunch of horror stories coming out of there from that. Now, isn't there? That's against international law. Israel uses white phosphorus. That's against international laws, chemical warfare. We'd have a lot more standing if we didn't do those things. We'd have a lot more standing if we never invaded Iraq illegally. But we did those things. And so again, I want to be clear. No, if anybody's making this point about how bad the West is to say, therefore, doesn't matter that Putin's doing it, that's wrong. That is whataboutism. That is deflection. That is obfuscation. But if somebody's making this point to say, yes, his illegal invasion is bad, and ours are too, so maybe we should actually abide by the values we pretend to have, that's the correct position. So look, I'm all for sanctions that go after Putin and the oligarchs. I'm not for any ones that hurt average civilians there. So if you want to draw a parallel to the Israeli situation, I'm all for sanctioning the government. I'm all for forcing their hand to stop illegally occupying Palestinian territory. I'm all for BDS of the illegally occupied territories. Because, again, that's to go after the problem. Now, if you tell me, well, every citizen of Israel, even ones who are in, Israel proper, where it's not the illegally occupied territories right now, if you tell me they all have to suffer too, no, then that's a different story, because that's similar to like hurting all the innocent people in Russia because of what Putin's doing, then I'm out. But look, we need to have fair, reasonable standards. And it's hard for people to take our moral preening seriously when it's so selectively applied. Look, I'll bring up this fact. I've brought up this fact a million times. I'll bring it up again. 73% of the world's dictatorships are armed and funded by the U.S. At the very least, if we're not talking about doing sanctions on these governments for various human rights abuses, etc., at the very least, you could not arm them to the teeth. But the fact of the matter is we care more about geopolitics, U.S. hegemony, and having control of the world than we do about any fake concerns about human rights or justice or morality or freedom or being the world police, so on and so forth. So it's hollow. Like, our criticisms are hollow. Try to stop what Russia's doing by targeted sanctions on oligarchs and Putin and using diplomacy in every way imaginable to get us back from the brink. That's the answer. For the other human rights abuses that we're guilty of, Noam Chomsky said it best. There's a very easy way to reduce terrorism. Stop participating in it. So what can we control? We could try to eliminate our own terrorism that we do. Now, to be fair to Biden, he's actually massively reduced the number of illegal drone strikes that happens. He's almost gotten rid of the drone war, so credit him on that. But to be fair, I don't know how much of that is a reporting problem, because I think Trump had rules in place at the end of his time in office where you don't have to report your drone strikes anymore, so he could just be continuing it, and we don't know because it's not reported as much anymore. But every indication I've seen indicates, everything I've seen indicates that it might actually be that he has genuinely reduced our drone strikes. That'd be wonderful. But, maybe also pull out of Iraq now. Maybe also stop doing the illegal sanctions that are killing children and women. So that's how we can make the world a better place. Stop doing the bad things that we do. And then also the people we have influence with, our allies, we can apply pressure on them to stop committing the war crimes that they commit. And then right there, you've cleaned up the world massively. Now, if there are going to be rogue states that also commit atrocities, do invasions, do human rights violations, etc., be targeted and specific in your response where you try to stop that exact thing by applying pressure on the right people, like targeted sanctions on Putin and the oligarchs, so on and so forth. That's the way forward. But obviously the hypocrisy is deep, and it clearly is bothering Richard Barrett, and he gave us a legendary rant. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.